kind of jumping right on in, so there's been 3 coronavirus response packages at this point. There was the phase 1 bill that was passed in early March 6th. That was the coronavirus preparedness and response bill. And that was an $8.3 billion emergency funding bill that mostly focused on vaccines and research and on small businesses. So there was a $7 billion in disaster assistance loans to small businesses impacted by COVID-19 at that point. Then on March 18th, the phase 2 bill was signed into law. That was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And that focused mainly on food assistance programs and on the paid leave side of things. And I'll touch on that a little bit because it also plays into everything else that we're talking about. So I will talk about some of that. And then finally, after a little bit of drama in both the Senate and in the House, on March 27th, the phase 3 bill, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act, was passed. And that was a $2 trillion package. To kind of start off with some of the unemployment stuff that was included in that phase 3 bill, that unemployment insurance was extended by 13 weeks and included a 4-month enhancement of benefits. And that includes a $600 per week per worker unemployment compensation check on top of what they would normally receive. Anybody who is eligible for regular UI is not eligible for this coronavirus-related UI, even if they've exhausted the regular UI benefits. And in order to be eligible for this UI, the individual must certify that they've had a coronavirus diagnosis or symptoms and are seeking medical attention, that a household member has had a diagnosis, that they're caring for a family member who's been diagnosed, that school or daycare closures have impacted them because they're the primary caregiver, that their workplace is locked down, that a health provider has advised them to self-quarantine, that the individual is about to start a new job, but that new job is no longer available because of COVID-19, that the individual is the breadwinner of the household because somebody died of COVID-19, that the individual had to quit their job because of circumstances related to COVID-19, or that the person's place of work is closed because of it. Anybody who is eligible for telework or is receiving paid sick and family leave is not eligible for unemployment. And there is a waiver of the 1-week waiting period to be able to apply for unemployment, and the federal government is picking up the tab for that waiver for that cost. And there's also a waiver of the need to be available and looking for work requirements. Now, the unemployment provisions actually backdate to January 27th. So if you're unemployed for any of those reasons, from January 27th to December 31st, you're eligible. However, the extra $600 payments will sunset on July 31st. So that enhanced benefit is not maintained. Additionally, in the phase 3 bill, there were payments given directly to individuals. So those payments are going to be deposited directly into bank accounts from the federal government. It's $1,200 per individual, or $2,400 on a joint return, plus $500 per child. That amount of money starts to phase out for anybody who makes more than $75,000 or $150,000 jointly. There's also the ability to tap into your 401k plans, loans, or take distributions penalty-free. And they waived the minimum distribution requirements for retirement and IRA plans for all of 2020. And that gets us to the business related stuff. Starting with the tax provisions, there is a delay in the payment of the employer payroll taxes between now and January 1st, 2021. So 50% will now be due on December 31st, 2021, and the remaining will be due December 31st, 2022. That, though, doesn't apply to employers who are taking loans that are forgiven under the Payroll Protection Program. And I will talk more about the Payroll Protection Program in a minute. There is also a employee retention credit for employers who are subject to closure for COVID-19. So it's a fully refundable 50% tax credit on the employer's share of the payroll taxes. And that's up to $10,000 per employee. And I know somebody had asked about what the C6s, 501c6s are eligible for. 501c6s are eligible for all of that, right? So the tax provisions, whether it's the delay in employer payroll taxes or in the employee retention tax credits, that is something that the 501c6s can tap into. Now, in terms of kind of the mid-size and larger size employees, and I know sounds like there's some of you on the phone here, there was $5 billion for loans and loan subsidies included in the bill. And there is a breakdown in that. So $25 billion in the loan and loan guarantees were specifically put aside for air carriers, air maintenance, and ticket agents. $4 billion was put aside specifically for cargo air carriers, $17 billion for businesses critical to maintaining national security, and then the other $454 billion is to eligible businesses, states, and municipalities. So recognizing it's not just businesses that are having trouble, there's also states and municipalities having trouble. There are some restrictions on getting this money, including stock buybacks and executive compensation limitations, though. And that brings us to the Small Business Paycheck Protection Act. Now, this is the new $349 billion lending program that people have been talking a lot about. It's modeled off of the existing SBA 7A program, and it's 100% guaranteed by the federal government, where the regular 7A loans are only 75% guaranteed. Unfortunately, this is the program that C6s are not eligible for. I think all of you who were helping try to, helping us try to get this included, I don't think that conversation is over. I do think there's going to be a phase 4 legislation that comes down the pike sometime in April or May, and the U.S. Chamber and hopefully you all will continue to help us really push hard on having the C6s included in that piece of legislation so that they can participate in this program. However, right now, only 501c3 nonprofits are included. So this is the small business. It's generally, this is for small businesses. Generally, that's defined as the typical way that SBA defines small businesses in the 7A program, usually under 500 employees. There are some exceptions in certain industries, though. Also, they've loosened up the restrictions a little bit to say that businesses that are in the accommodation and food services sector are eligible if they have under 500 employees in each location. So it doesn't have to be overall. It could be spread out. As I mentioned, it's 501c3 nonprofits are eligible, and then sole proprietors, self-employed, and independent contractors are also eligible to apply.
Allison, can I ask a question?
Please, go right ahead.
Yeah, and so you mentioned restaurants and hospitality, and my dog's sneaking up behind me. Hopefully he doesn't bark. But what about multi-entity firms? So like if you have an apparel company that has several entities, is it 500 employees per entity, or is it an aggregate?
No, it is that in that case, it's in the aggregate. They only made the exception for the NAICS code 72 folks. So it's just in accommodation and food services.
So if somebody has like 88 retail locations, right, they're going to have over 500 employees. Is there a different program that would fit them?
Then they wouldn't be, there isn't a loan forgiveness program. The thing about this payroll protection program is that there's a loan forgiveness part. They would simply be eligible for the loans under that, that I just talked about, the larger, for mid-sized and larger employers, the $450 billion in loans.
And that's going to be, those payments are deferred, right? Or do they have to start making?
Yes, they're deferred for a year.
For a year, okay. Principal and interest.
Yes. So, yeah, it's not, they really did draw this a pretty tight distinction between the small and the mid-size and larger folks. And to be honest, and some of these, and some of how you go about even getting the loans has been loosened up a lot more for the smaller folks. So, for example, the Small Business Administration test for not being able to get credit elsewhere has been waived. There's no personal guarantee or collateral required for these payroll protection program. And to your point, the lenders defer the fees, principal, and interest for no less than 6 months and for no more than a year. All lenders are actually going to be eligible to provide these payroll protection loans. Currently, obviously, if you're an SBA lender already, you're eligible. But if you're not an SBA lender, Treasury and SBA are putting together procedures to approve those lenders quickly to open some of that up. And these loans are a little complicated. The way the maximum loan amount is calculated is based on 2.5 months of payroll costs, not to exceed $10 million. However, the way the loan forgiveness portion is calculated is that for the portion of the loan that is used on payroll, interest on mortgages, rent, or utilities for 8 weeks, when you hit that 8-week period, whatever you've used on those things, that part is forgiven. So it turns into a grant after 8 weeks after origination. So even though you've calculated the maximum loan amount on 2.5 months of salary, and you're using it for these other things, it doesn't quite match up, and that is accurate. There's been a lot of questions about whether or not that is the correct interpretation or whether that's accurate, but yes, it is. Now, obviously, if the full principal of the loan is forgiven, then the borrower is not going to be responsible for interest that's accrued in that 8-week period. However, if there's any of the loan left after that 8-week period that isn't forgiven, then the borrower is just subject to the regular terms and conditions that were agreed upon with the lender. So the other thing about this loan is that if the employer reduces staff, or if the employer reduces salaries and wages by more than 25%, then the amount of loan that is forgiven is decreased by that same ratio. This is all about trying to help small businesses maintain staff and maintain salary between now and June 30th. And so any reductions, any changes between now and June 30th, that will count against you in terms of what the amount is that can be forgiven. There were also changes to the SBA's economic industry and disaster loans, which are the loans that folks are in general a little more familiar with because they've existed for longer. These loans are the EIDL loans. These loans, 501c6s are eligible for. So while you can't participate in the PPP loans, you can participate in the EIDL loans as long as you have fewer than 500 employees. And it also is opened up to self-employed, so sole proprietors and independent contractors. These loans are up to $2 million in working capital. They have up to a 30-year term. And for nonprofits, the interest rate is 2.75. And for everyone else, the interest rate is 3.75. These payments can be deferred for up to a year. They're made solely based on credit score, and similarly, the no available credit elsewhere requirements are waived. If the loan is under $200,000, there's no personal guarantee, and if it's under $25,000, there's no collateral needed. And then this to the question earlier about the $10,000. The way this works is that borrowers who apply for this loan can receive a $10,000 emergency grant within 3 days of application for the loan. However, that $10,000 has to be used on things like that are COVID-19 related, that are helping to keep the business open or meet payroll. So it can be paid leave, it can be maintaining payroll, it can be increased costs due to supply chain disruption, mortgage or lease payments, repaying obligations that you otherwise wouldn't be able to meet because of lost revenue, that sort of thing. Even if you don't end up getting approved for the EIDL loan, you don't have to pay this $10,000 emergency grant back. So that automatically becomes a grant. The one thing, so there had been questions about whether or not folks can borrow both under the PPP program and the EIDL program. And the answer is yes, you can. However, you can't use the expenses for the same thing. So for example, the borrower can use the EIDL loan for increases in costs because of supply chain disruption, and use the PPP loan for payroll and rent. That said, when the PPP loan is forgiven, if there's also the EIDL loan, that $10,000 in emergency grant that is forgiven counts towards that $10,000 in what's forgiven in your PPP loan. So you can't double dip the grant part of it, basically. And those EIDL loans are directly through SBA. So the PPP loans are through your lender. The EIDL loans that the C6s can apply for are through SBA. Let me quickly talk about the paid leave stuff, and then I'll open it up for questions. So the bill did put into effect mandatory paid sick and paid family medical leave reasons that are specifically COVID-19 related. These leave provisions go into effect on April 1st, so tomorrow, and they all expire on December 31st, 2020. So none of them are making any of this permanent, either on the paid sick or paid FMLA side. Both the paid sick and the paid FMLA programs are 100% tax refundable. And in order to be able to preserve business liquidity, employers can actually keep the money that they would have deposited for payroll taxes in anticipation of the refunds, for the paid sick and FMLA leave that's provided. Self-employed individuals are eligible for both the paid sick and paid FMLA tax credits, assuming that they would have been eligible for the leave if they had been working for another employer. There are a couple of exclusions. Employers who are employees who are healthcare providers or emergency responders the employer may decide to exempt those individuals from this paid leave. Those are the only exemptions in terms of the types of employees. And then in the case of businesses that have fewer than 50 employees, there can be an exemption for an employee giving that employee the paid sick or paid FMLA leave would jeopardize the viability of the business. So we're still waiting for official regulations on what that looks like. But basically, if paying that leave would result in expenses and financial obligations that exceed the available revenues and costs the business to be able to cease operating, then you don't have to pay it. If the absence of a specific employee requesting the leave would result in a substantial risk to the financial health or operational capabilities of the business, either because of that employee's knowledge or because of what their actual responsibilities are, you don't have to pay that leave. And then if there aren't enough other employees who are either able or willing or qualified to perform the duties of the person requesting the leave, then, and the duties would, if those duties aren't performed, it would decrease the business's capacity to exist, then you don't have to provide the leave there. And there you have to provide documentation to say that that's the case in order for to be eligible for those exemptions. And that's for both the paid sick leave and the paid FMLA leave. Now the paid, and this is all, I don't know if I said this at the beginning, but it's all for businesses with fewer than 500 employees. And it's a little confusing, but the way this is calculated is literally the number of employees on the day that the employee is requesting leave. So I know some businesses fluctuate in that sometimes they're a little over, some of the times they're a little above. You calculate the 500 employees by, it's anybody who's on leave, it's anybody who's currently working, it's anybody that you hire as a temp employee. So they may not even be on your payroll specifically, they may be on another business's payroll, but working for you. That all counts in your 500 employees. Independent contractors do not count in that 500 though. And it's literally on the day that is that count on the day that the employee is requesting leave. So the paid sick leave is 10 days of paid leave for a full-time employee, or for a part-time employee, it's the amount of leave that they would, it's the amount of time that they would have normally worked on over a 2-week period. So full-time and part-time employees, this is in addition to whatever the employer already offers, or in addition to what the employer already offers, and in addition to whatever the state and local requirements are. So this is 10 days on top of that. For employees, and there's 2 sets of rates. So for employees who are subject to a government quarantine because of COVID-19, for employees who a health provider has said that they need to self-quarantine because of COVID-19, or employees who are experiencing symptoms and seeking medical advice, those employees get compensated at their regular rate, the federal minimum wage or the local minimum wage, whatever is the highest of those, with a cap of $511 per day and $5,100 in the aggregate. If the employee, though, is taking leave to care for somebody else who's under quarantine orders, to care for a child because schools are closed or their caregiver is unavailable, or if they're experiencing, and this is part is a little weird, experiencing conditions outlined by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, but not seeking medical advice, those individuals get compensated at 2/3 of the rate that they would have otherwise received, with a $200 per day maximum and a $2,000 cap in aggregate. With the paid FMLA, that leave is, even though it's paid family medical leave, that leave is only for employees. So it's 10 weeks of paid FMLA. It's only for employees who have been with the employer for at least 30 days. And it is only for individuals who are staying home to care for a child because of school closures or daycare closures and don't have the ability to telework. That That paid leave is 2/3 of the regular rate of pay with a $10,000 in aggregate cap. And it can only go into effect after the 10 days of paid leave have been exhausted. And for anybody who was laid off after March 1st but rehired for whatever reason, that paid FMLA leave is unavailable to them.